Good evening, everyone. My name is Ansar Jassim, and I warmly welcome you to our event, War on Ukraine, the Impact on West Asia, North Africa, and Solidarities from Below. This event is a joint cooperation between Left East, Disorient, and the Working Group on International Politics and Political Theory of the Bildungswerk Berlin of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. In a bit, I will also post you the links to these three organizations in the chat, so you can check out our text, knowledge production, and further events. This event was realized with the financial support of the Foundation Deutsche Klassenlotterie Berlin, so thank you for this. And before we start, I'd like to inform you that this Zoom event is streamed live on Facebook. Thank you, Georg Leier, who's taking care of the technical side of this event. You can write your questions in the chat during the event, so you do not have to wait until the end. And together with Olena Lupachenko from Left East, I will collect them and pass your questions from Facebook and from the Zoom chat to the moderators. Olena and me will also provide you with links to relevant literature to the topics discussed. So make sure to save the chat before you leave, so you will have a little literature in the future to read up on the different topics. I'm so happy now to welcome our guests that are at the front lines of their and our common struggles, and our moderators. And this mix of people involved in this event also really shows that there's a need to make this an internationalist discussion with internationalist perspectives that go beyond nation-state borders. I now pass the word to our two moderators, Adriana from Left East and Henrietta from Disorient, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ansar, for this lovely introduction. So hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Adriana Kubayova. I am a doctor in comparative gender studies with a specialization on Lebanon. I'm also a member of Left East's editorial board, which is a left-wing platform that offers a mixture of theoretically and analytically informed contributions on current matters in the Eastern European region and beyond. We seek to inform, illuminate, and mobilize. Henny?
Yeah, from my side, I'm Henriette. I'm a social worker and also doing currently my PhD on the Syrian minority in Russia. And I'm active with this Orient platform where we try to challenge common narratives on the West Asia, North Africa region through post-colonial lens.
Great. Okay, so as Russia's war in Ukraine enters its third month now, its impact on the West Asia and North Africa region, which is what we call the WANA region, remains only sporadically analyzed. So this is despite the fact that we have multiple political, military, and economic ties with both Russia and Ukraine. Therefore, we jointly cooperated to have some in-depth discussion with key actors from the WANA region and also from Ukraine in order to discuss the consequences of this war for the WANA region, but also really importantly to explore possible avenues for solidarities from below. So with that, I would love to introduce our four speakers today. So our first speaker is Oksana Duchak, who is a researcher from Ukraine and an activist in Commons. My colleagues will post the webpage of Commons now. Commons is a Ukrainian journal of social criticism founded in 2009. Our second speaker is Rabia El Habibi, who is based in Paris and works for the Federation of Tunisians for Citizenship of the Two Shores, FTCR, formerly called the Union of Tunisian Immigrant Workers, UTIT. Our third speaker is Serge Harfouch, who is a farmer and a food sovereignty activist based in Lebanon. And our fourth speaker is Lyon from the Cantine Syrienne de Montreux, which is a collective of Syrian exiles and their comrades. In this collective, they reflect on their experiences in the Syrian revolution and how it can inform and support the resistance to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So thank you all for joining us and welcome.
So just to give a short overview again, like what's today's topics we're trying to cover. So we would start firstly with an update on the situation in Ukraine, Tunisia, and Lebanon, and people in exile in general, and relate this updates to the war situation in Ukraine. And then also we're going ahead and try to see what is the war economic and the social impact on the WANA regions and the community, and try with our speakers to have a focus on the migrant economy, on food sovereignty, and examples for like food sovereignty. And also the Leon, we try to have a look on lessons which can be learned from Russia's military engagement in WANA region, and also including Russia's support for the Syrian regime. And as a last point, we try to sum up and try to answer the question, how can solidarity from below be a meaningful and practice in armed conflicts, with special focus on securing food supplies, activist networks, out-migration and remittances, as well as working on revolution in exile. And also feel free to all the time to post questions in the chat. You can do this already now, and at the end we will give space to the audience that we can discuss the questions. So for now, we would like to start with Oksana. Oksana, I know it's a really difficult situation for your country and for you also personally. You just settled down a bit in Germany, in Ukraine. Can you give a short overview of how the situation is, especially like movements and activist networks coming up and trying to organize in war times and this difficult economic situation?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this event. I'm not, it's actually the first event I've joined since, it's the first public event at least I've joined since the beginning of war. I'm still quite unsettled, but I think the topic we discussed today is really important. And yeah, I'm happy to, not happy maybe, but I'm glad that I'm here to speak on the Ukrainian case, and it's the role of the situation in the overall topic of more global perspective on how this conflict influenced the situation in other countries and other regions. So briefly, just figures which you may already know or you may follow, or just an update. So far we have the hot phase of the conflict going on for more than 2 months already, and we have the situation with 12 million people displaced inside the country, which to imagine it's like the 1/4 of the whole population of Ukraine. Roughly half of them left the country, the rest half of them, or a little bit more than half, stays inside the country. Also, according to estimation by international organization, there are approximately 3,300 casualties already, but the toll of death is far bigger, of course, because international organizations, they recognize that they cannot follow the score of casualties in big territories, including like mostly in eastern Ukraine, especially in Mariupol. The estimation cannot be done, but according to some attempts to estimate, the toll of deaths may surpass 10,000 and maybe even 20,000 people already. We have also infrastructure and social infrastructure damaged heavily. For example, there are figures already still in April that we have 300 hospitals destroyed and something like almost 1,000 schools destroyed already. So we live in a situation where the whole social reproduction of the society is disturbed to a great degree. So because of that, there are numerous needs, because the economy is also totally distorted, and the needs of the people can hardly be sufficiently satisfied. So we are speaking about all the varieties of needs, starting from food and healthcare and education and childcare and housing, which is also like heavily destroyed. And because of the internal displacement, the need of housing is very high in the regions which accept internally displaced people. This situation is somehow like the government tries to deal with it, but of course, the capacities and the resources which are available are not enough, and numerous networks and initiatives and organizations are engaged in meeting those needs. And again, those needs are very different, starting from supplying food to people who live in destroyed or partially destroyed towns and villages, and also including evacuation of people from dangerous zones to a safety, and providing them with basic needs and possibilities to at least to hide from war or maybe to start a new life. In general, I would say that all the possible organizations and all the possible networks which existed before were mobilized, starting from like traditional liberal NGOs and different groups and initiatives and new emerging groups which are dealing with newly emerging needs of people. For example, there is an initiative which is called Women March. It's an initiative which was dealing with organization of the Women's March on the 8th of March each year. And now they are overwhelmingly helping, like providing humanitarian support to women and women with kids, or just women who are either in the destroyed territories or trying to flee to safety, or are already in safety but without means to provide for them. Another example, there is a left initiative which is called Operation Solidarity, who are using also all the possible international connections to mobilize resources, both for those people who went into army to fight and those people who need humanitarian relief. All in all, I would say that all the possible networks and international connections are used at this point, and not only those which were organized according to some ideological principle, but also those who were organized on totally different principles. For example, like networks of artists, or networks of scientists, or networks of healthcare workers. These all are trying to mobilize as many resources, including human resources, because, for example, we have volunteers, healthcare workers and doctors who are coming to country to provide people with who need healthcare assistance, and those who are wounded or just need some regular treatment. And Ukrainian hospitals don't have enough capacities to deal with it. Personally, I would say that I'm very maybe one of the best example which I have here is feminist solidarity, because unlike in broadly speaking leftist ideological spectrum, there is while in leftist ideological spectrum there is a certain discussion and a certain disagreement between people of different camps how to perceive the situation in Ukraine and how to deal with it. This kind of discussion are far less in feminist cycles, and I would say that feminist cycles, as to my impression, are providing great solidarity and support for people in Ukraine. And this is especially important in the case of gender-based violence, which is usual friend of any war, I would say, but in this case explicitly related to the stories from those territories which were under Russian occupation. And I have, for example, here in Germany, there is an initiative which is cooperating with the Polish initiative and with the Ukrainian initiative, and providing psychological help, providing emergency contraception and all the kind of support which is needed to women who experienced gender-based violence in relation to war. Yeah, I think I would stop now and pass to other participants whom I really looking forward to hear. But there is also another thing which I would like to tell a bit about economy and food related issues, but I think I will do it a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oksana, for bringing us up to speed with what's going on right now in Ukraine and the horrifying toll, of course, of this war, and also for telling us about all these different networks that are emerging. And I also look forward to discussing that more. So for now, let's move to Rabia. So Rabia, in relation to this crisis, how is the situation in Tunisia? Do people already feel the impact from the war in Ukraine? So we know, for example, that Tunisia is struggling already with a high number of outflow migration. How is the current situation affecting this phenomenon? At the same time, we also know that Tunisia has a significant number of migrants from the sub-Saharan Africa. So how is their economic situation affected, given that they tend to stay in Tunisia for a long time? I pass the word to you. And I believe you're muted, if you can unmute.
Sorry. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you for inviting me to this event. It's important to remember that war is not a country issue, it's a global issue. And in Tunisia, we already feel that. And I will start by the last part of your question is about the outflow migration. Because outflow migration in Tunisia is a result of economic and social crisis that Tunisia is living for several years now, and I think that the war will bring more complication to a highly complex situation in Tunisia. So the economic and social situation will be more hard. So the outflow migration will be harder. And for the third part of question, how does Tunisian feel the war? I want to bring first some context. I want to speak about the political and social and economic situation in Tunisia. Politically, Tunisia is facing one of the most complicated situations, especially starting of 25 July with the changes that Kais Said has made. Change of government, change of governors, a key post in different public companies. Well, it's not important if you agree or not agree with that, but it creates a sort of political instabilities to a country which is already very tired politically, economically, and socially, especially after the COVID. And for the direct impact of the war, I will speak about three crises. First one is the Tunisian student crisis, and it was the first crisis. And I think that it's in this moment that Tunisian aware that there is a war in Ukraine, because we have around 1,800 people who are students who are in Ukraine, and we have seen that all the students from MENA region have struggled to back home, especially Egyptian, Moroccans, Algerian, and Tunisian. But for Tunisian, the problem is not ended yet, because most of the students are medical students, and in Tunisia, to be a medical student is very hard. It's very complicated, and the challenge for a Ministry of Higher Education is to include this person in the healthcare system, the Tunisian healthcare system. And it's very hard because it's complicated and it's full of symbolic value and social value. So it's hard to re-put them in the system. And we can feel the tension between students from Ukrainian universities and Tunisian from Tunisian universities. On the second level, I want to speak about the economic situation. First, let's say that unfortunately, most of our cereals in Tunisia came from Russia and Ukraine, and this has a very big impact. The first impact that the pasta price has increased, and the weight of the bread has decreased. So we have the same price for the ordinary Tunisian baguette, is still the same price, but we don't have the same weight. So for a Tunisian to eat normally before the war, he need to buy one baguette, but after the war, he need to buy 3, 4. So it was the strategy of the government to not make the prices higher. And for the pasta, we can already remark 40 millions more on the price of the pasta. And why I choose pasta and baguette, because they are two usual traditional food that Tunisian use every day. So if you have any changes on that, that means that we already feel something like that. I want to see about the bread that in Tunisia in 1944, we have a revolution we call the revolution of the bread. And that shows the symbolic power of the bread for Tunisia. The second thing is the energy problem. Until now, we have already 3 times increase in the energy cost. And Ministry of Energy says that we will increase 3% every month until the end of the year in order to find solution for the deficit that Tunisia is living before the war and especially after the war. And so every Tunisian use cars, because in Tunisia, unfortunately, we don't have a transport platform developed. So we are obliged to use cars. So this kind of change will impact considerably the life of Tunisian. And the third point is the crisis to come. And here I'm speaking about touristic, especially Russian touristic, because after putting Russia out of the SWIFT system, Tunisia risks to see 7% of their client out because of the war. And 7% is something very big, especially if you know that, for example, French are 9.5%. So if French, who are our usual traditional target, 9.5%, that means that 7 is very, very high, and it may change all our incomes from tourists, and it's very, very hard for a country economically tired. I will stop here for this part, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Rabia, for highlighting these issues, the 3 main issues. And I just want to mention with the student crisis, it actually brings to mind the kind of historic relations between the MENA or the WANA region and Ukraine, as well as Russia, given that there were already in the 60s and 70s, large numbers of students always coming from the MENA region or from the WANA region to Russia and Ukraine. Of course, it's a more complex issue after 1990s, but it remains a very key relationship, I think, that the region holds both with Ukraine and with Russia. So with the issue of food, let's move on to Serge. So the question of food is perhaps the most immediate concern for many countries in the WANA region, as we just heard about Tunisia. But there are other countries also that depend entirely on either Ukraine or Russia or both for wheat. At the same time, many communities in the WANA region have experience in creating self-sustainability, and especially due to the wars or the difficult economic situations that they lived through. So we have several examples from, for example, communities in Syria going, trying to be self-sustainable, but also your example in Lebanon. So can you tell us a little bit more about this idea of food sovereignty, and how is it connected to self-determination in your own work?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to see familiar faces. Let's begin with the essential as a concept. As we see it, food sovereignty is very much different from food security. and this is why we're aiming for specifically for sovereignty, because it is based on us as a people, or any people anywhere in the world, being able to determine their destiny through being able to control their production and the means of their production. So what we've seen in the region with the war in Syria after the revolution, and what has been done to the people by the use of food scarcity, by the use of controlling access to food and controlling people through that, it was clear for us that it was extremely important to be able to be independent, at least on that subject, in order to have at least more means to decide what can be done later, the rest of it, let's say external politics, etc. The thing is, in Lebanon's situation, we are deeply dependent on imports. It's something, it's a crazy number. It's something like 90% of our food supply, if I'm not mistaken, is imported. And if we're going to consider just wheat, which means bread and pasta, and this echoes a lot with what Rabia was saying on our food system, our food tradition. Let's say it's based a lot on bread as well. So we depend a lot on flour, so we depend a lot on wheat, and 80% of it, something like that, is imported directly from Ukraine. So if this cuts and it's starting to get scarce and even more scarce, we will not be able, on the short run, we will not be able to have the basic nutritional value that we usually have. So this is one part. The other problem is it's crazy how it echoes with what's happening in Tunisia, maybe a little bit different because of the economic situation in Lebanon, which is a complete mess. So we are already in an economic, it's beyond the crisis, it's already the collapse. So the prices have gone way up. I don't have the numbers, but they're crazy as well. What I can tell you is that the value of our currency has lost like 10 times its value, which means that everything that is imported is 10 times more expensive, even if it's not changed as a price internationally. So meaning that when the prices are gonna start changing internationally, which I believe is already happening because of the war, it's gonna be like an exponential impact on our food import, on our food consumption, etc. This being said, since we thought that the main idea was to be able to be independent, at least with the seed production, in order to produce the rest of the food, our idea was to at least focus on that, make it available. And this is the main activity of our association. Now, how is it impacting on a Lebanese national level? It's not that much because we are pretty small, but the idea in itself is starting to make its way, meaning that people are, in a way or another, understanding now how important it was and it should always be to at least have the seeds that are the machine that produces our food. And then we start to see other models a little bit in let's say in the WANA region. We have contact with many seed producers that are focusing on the heirloom seeds to get themselves and other independent from the agro industry globalized corporation that usually controls the food production. So what we were looking into, and then got to a point where it's become a pretty decent weight, was the recuperation and then the reproduction of the local varieties that are already adapted to the climate of the Bilad al-Sham, the Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Iraq region, which is at the same time the origin of all the wheat historically in the world. So basically what we were looking for were all the varieties that started from there and that can grow without much, let's say, chemical interventions, in the sense that in that case, we can also be having crops that are bringing us what's the word? The food value, the nutritional value we're looking for, and at the same time have the cost a lot less for farmers to be able to produce it, which means that we can produce it in completely organic form. We don't have to rely on chemical entrants. We don't have to rely on chemical fertilizers, which both are also imported and which both are also dependent on the gas production that is slowly being either cut or extremely expensive, which will impact the all global food production on not a long term, like it will come pretty soon. So basically the idea of food sovereignty in that case is also having sovereignty on the whole production. And this is the work we're trying to do now. It's linked to a lot of work that is being done either in Europe or in North Africa or in many other places. And the whole idea is not only to spread the work itself or the seeds themselves, which can travel and adapt and be able to provide a good nutritional value everywhere, but also to be able to transmit the knowledge and the know-how, the capacity to actually produce it. And so, yes, I think I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge, for this really valuable input actually on this on the situation in Lebanon. I also really like that you pointed out like the value of the need to have also ecological farming systems keeping on, especially as, for example, in Germany, the discussion is going away from these ideas with the start of the war in Ukraine. So thank you a lot for this. And now we would move on to Leonie and or to Leon. Yeah, in your work with Canteen, how do Syrians in exile and their comrades view the new waves of exilees from Ukraine, and what connections are you already seeing between these two phenomena? Is there a shared ground at this point somehow, which you see?
Hello first, but thank you very much for inviting us at this very important discussion, and along with this fantastic panel. I'm Leon. I'm French Iranian, and I will speak today on behalf of the Cantine Syrienne, the Syrian Canteen. We're a collective of Syrian exiles and French, Moroccan, Iranian comrades, international comrades, anchored through a local organization in the suburbs of Paris, in Montreuil, in the east. We organize popular canteen at free donation 2 to 3 times a week, along with concerts, conferences, and screenings. And we also give French and Arabic lessons and Syrian cuisine workshops, all of them at free donations every week. And so this collective was created 3 years ago by Syrian and French comrades who wanted to create a space where could flourish the Syrian revolution in exile, along with internationalism in many forms. And the idea was also to bring together spaces that didn't have much common space before. For example, Syrian exiles or the diaspora would meet in themselves, and the more self-organized French-anchored popular canteens would meet by themselves. But now it can meet. The reason why we're here and what we're going to talk about is that linked to the fact that soon after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we published a text called War in Ukraine, 10 Lessons from Syria, which I believe we can share with you later, or now. It's now in the chat. Whereas we acknowledge that the situations in Syria and in Ukraine are very different, but the idea with this text was to draw on what we have learned from the revolution in Syria and from the war that followed, and we hope to offer some perspectives that seemed important to us. And actually we had a lot of feedback, like the text circulated a lot, and we received a lot of feedback on this text. And we realized through what people were saying that it was shared because a lot of people in the leftist circles or agreed with what the text argued, but told us that this position was not formulated very often. And that's a position that we gained through our experience of the Syrian revolution and through the experience of exile, but also through the experience of uprisings that were misunderstood abroad. And yeah, to answer now your question about exile, and how the context of Ukraine and Syria echo. Well, as many of you potentially did also, we witnessed a racist institutional hierarchization that was very strong in France. Well, in France, the question of refugees is viewed hegemonically through a very racist lens, and it's a discourse that is dominated with ideas of the extreme right that mentioned that there was a sort of valuable Ukrainian refugees, as in white refugees, in opposition to, I cite, barbaric refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, and etc. And the idea was very clearly that we neither want to participate in this hierarchization, neither we want to reverse it and deny the importance of the rights to defend the Ukrainian refugees. To us, it makes no sense at all, because on top of that, there were also many cases, as Rami mentioned, also of racism at the borders, where Black Ukrainians and Ukrainians of color or foreign students had an issue at the border. So we remain organized on all fronts, advocating for an unconditional welcoming of all refugees and a very strong anti-racist ground. And to make it with concrete example, we organized a day in support of Ukraine, a full day and night where we gathered money for organization on the ground. I think Oksana mentioned one of the organizations we supported, the coordination of solidarity in Ukraine, and also local canteens organized by women in Lviv. And we're also in relation with Russian exile activists in Paris, who created also a solidarity committee for Ukraine in Paris. And we integrated ourselves a collective of solidarity with Ukraine. And at the same time, like since the beginning of our organization, we're helping support occupations of other exiled initiatives. For example, now in Paris, there is the Chapelle Debout, which is an organization that is in support of refugees in Paris, that is organizing a big occupation in the city. And it's a huge organization, and we're also in contact with them and in support of this coordination. We have helped other occupation of Sudanese, Eritrean exiled. So that's how we're trying to remain present and strong on all fronts in this case.
Okay, thank you so much, Leon, for charting out these ways of collaborating, and also your important work in building solidarity between various communities of migrants and refugees. So why don't we take the following 15 minutes or 20 minutes to discuss between the four speakers a little bit more, now that you've heard a bit from each other. We, as coordinators, are seeing, or moderators are seeing, a couple of shared themes, so we'll throw those out, but if you want to respond to each other directly, then please do. I also encourage our audience to start typing their questions in the chat. You can do so either in Facebook or in the Zoom chat, so that we can incorporate your questions into these kinds of discussions before we move on to the second question. So let me start by drawing the first thing that I'm hearing from you all is actually that the Russian war on Ukraine has exacerbated many of the already tenuous and terrible conditions in the WANA region. So it's not that the rise in food prices and energy costs, etc., are only a direct result of the war in Ukraine, but it's actually coming after a history of failed revolutions, of COVID, of, like a currency crash in Lebanon, a very bad kind of economic downturn in Lebanon specifically, but also a very stifled political situation in Tunisia. So this is something I'm observing. So maybe if you want to add a few comments to that, you're very welcome to. At some point also, Oksana, I know that you held some of your comments on the economic impact so that you share them later. So I think you can definitely interject here. But there's a second line of similarity that Henriette would like to mention. So go ahead, Henriette.
Sorry. Yeah, what we like while talking also became more clear to us. So observing a lot. I mean, as the different, for example, the situation in Ukraine and in Lebanon is talking about the food, because I mean, sort of historically, Ukraine used to be always the wheat storage, and for example, in the southern parts of Ukraine, there's a huge impact of the dark soil. So like the food sovereignty in Ukraine is sort of easier possible than in Lebanon, but still at the war times there's similar situations now that people in Ukraine have to fear about their food sovereignty, the same situation as in Lebanon. So we would be happy maybe to have some more impact, more input from Oksana and Serge on this similarities in the regions, even if it's so different to each other.
So do you want to go ahead, Oksana, maybe to start, and then we move on to, we'll see who else.
Yes, thank you. I would make some comments in referring to other participants and maybe to some general questions. I think in general, the issue of the economic impact of the war in Ukraine is one of the huge importance. And here, like Ukraine was one of the biggest exporter of agricultural production, and there are a lot of talks about it, also how it will influence different regions of the world, but of course first of all probably vulnerable countries which are themselves in a dire economic situation even before, but which can become even worse because of the war. The thing with agricultural export of Ukraine is that it has a very symbolic prominence for the country also, because during the Soviet period, the country was built or constructed as a quite high technology country with a big industrial complex. But after the independence, especially after 2000s, the economic development course was changed to an extent, and there was a big wave of deindustrialization and all these things which went together with it, and economic collapse and everything. But in the end, like the huge portion of economic development was targeting especially agricultural sector, and there was this discourse that we will become a agricultural super state or whatever. There were a lot of problems with this agricultural superstate. Of course, one of them was that a huge portion of profits coming from agriculture and from export of agricultural production were going offshore, so they were not taxed properly. And while owners of these companies they got super profits, like the state budget got very little from it. So there were all these problematics, and in the context of war also, and in the context of global production, it is also interesting to follow, because Ukraine was also included in many supply chains of different industries. Now they also speak that war in Ukraine will impact the semiconductor industry a lot. I was personally dealing with garment sector, which produce for Western brands, and it's production in Ukraine was also happening, producing clothes for famous Western brands. I think the difference is here that while in this production, inside the global supply chains, the peculiarity of this production is that it is relatively easier relocated. Relatively, of course, it depends on which production we are talking about. For example, production of garment is extremely easy relocatable. Other productions may be less, like for example, semiconductor is a bit harder, but it's still kind of possible, because the whole global system of this supply chains was constructed in a way to be able to relocate production easily. So here we can say that, of course, there will be a short-term crisis in these industries, because I think would recover quite fast. At least how I see it from now. And the situation with agriculture is totally different, because it's not easily relocatable. And in terms of the war in Ukraine, so now we see how the whole season of agricultural season is under the threat on the big part of Ukrainian territory due to war happening. And also we all hear all the stories about a Russian government, Russian army stealing the wheat, which was collected or stored in Kherson region, which is now partially under Russian occupation. So they're just taking harvest from a previous season and moving into Russia. And also another implication is that even when the war will be over, you cannot easily start doing agriculture as usual, because of the mines, which are dangerous for people. And Ukraine is now has the biggest territory polluted by this weapon, which are dangerous for people. So we see that in terms of agricultural production and in terms of food export, the implication can be very, far more long-standing than with other. Sorry, I went mute. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So one more point which I would like to add here is that we see how the war in itself, it's not just a military process and not just political process, is deeply embedded into economic situation and global economic conditions. And here we can compare, at least this comparison came to my mind when I was hearing to Rabi and to Serge that we have the Eastern European countries Western European countries, heavily dependent on Russian gas, and we have the countries in more vulnerable countries, heavily dependent on Ukrainian and Russian agricultural production. And we also see how Western countries do not want to continue not doing it fast enough, and oil, and at the same time, so they have to make this decision at some point, or not make this, abstain from making this decision to preserve the economic conditions. And we already see how the their action or inaction here are influencing the situation of more vulnerable countries, which are depending not that much on Russian gas and oil, but very much on the agricultural production, which is under the threat because of the war. So this all processes are like deeply embedded in the economic and the global economy and how it is constructed, organized, perceived, and who has power in it.
Thank you. Thank you, Oksana, so much. Would any of these speakers like to engage? I think I saw your hand earlier, Serge, but I'm not sure if that was correct.
No, I was just saying, please go ahead, because I thought it was directed towards me. Just, I might add one little thing about that, about the system and how it is imbricated in the sense that the more vulnerable countries always at some point, because of this dependency, end up where they are and end up making their own situation worse, while believing that is it's a situation that is very far away. Like if we consider what's happening right now, if we consider the point of view of people in Lebanon on the war that is happening on Ukraine, there are so many different opinions and point of views and theories, and most of the time there's always alignments in one camp or the other or whatever, and the main issue is always forgotten and always set aside, which is again soon we will not have food, or we will not be able to afford the food. And this also shows the inability of the what do you call it, the sulta, the regime that is in place in our country, the inability to actually look ahead and be prepared for situations like these, or at least be prepared to balance it a little bit. So again, food sovereignty as a concept is extremely important, as small as the country might be or as big as it might be constructed. We always need, in a way or another, we need to be able to think it ahead, even in bigger scale countries that can also be decentralized in the production system and the consumption system. So yeah, this is what I wanted to add, because Oksana, you said something that always strikes us, which is we think more of the fuel than we think of the food, and now we see how it is impacting us directly in the wheat production specifically, and the rest of it is just, at least from my farmer point of view, is like there's this big difference in priorities in all. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Serge. Would anybody like to react to that, Rabia or Leon? Leon, I think one of what this discussion is echoing for me is one of the 10 lessons in that article, which is to not basically only speak in this geopolitical frame, right? And I think Sergio said that, to not only speak in this mentality of the camps, because then we forget the people on the ground, the farmers, the actual people who are, looking at the economy from a very different perspective. We do have a couple of questions that have come in at the moment. So maybe one important note to mention, we have a question from Arturo De Simone, who's asking what can be done to alert the European public and its officials to the injustice of the EU making new business deals with the Egyptian Sisi regime and ignoring Sisi's atrocities in order to condemn Russian atrocities. So it seems that Arturo here is drawing a link between kind of, the selective condemnation of, whose atrocities can we actually condemn and whose do we accept. And we have an article a little bit about this, the place of Sisi's economy within the European war economy. So I'll post the link for you there too. But in case you have any reflections, feel free to share them now. If not, we can move to the second question. So does anybody want to respond to anything? You can still respond to anything else that the speakers have said. Okay. Henriette, did you have anything to add before I move on?
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. Okay. So I believe the second question is yours, if you want to take it up.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's move on for now. And we touched already a little bit in topics, and even it's really painful. There was so much destruction and suffering, but we have to ask, like, what are the lessons and we learned from the Russia's military engagement in the WANA region, including its support for the Syrian regime. As an example. So this, I don't know, maybe Oksana, she just talk, maybe Liam can try to put some thoughts about this question as well.
Yeah, I can start probably. I think sorry, I just didn't hear you very well, so maybe the idea was a bit different.
But you heard the question, yeah?
Not really.
The question was just the question was just even as painful as it is, we wanted to ask, like, what are the lessons which can be learned from Russia's military engagement in the WANA region, including the support of the Syrian regime as an example. So that's addressing a little bit Leon, because they did work on it already, but also it would be interesting to see your views on this, Oksana. We did touch on it already a bit.
Yeah, I can start probably. I think at least now in Ukraine, at least in leftist cycles, there are a lot of talks about the parallels between Russian engagement in Syria and the Russian engagement and Russian war in Ukraine. I think why this example is important for Ukrainian leftists, at least because unlike in many other countries, it was the situation in Syria is not only about Western imperialism, and so this example, this sad example, like provides us with some argument to convince some people, mostly in Western countries, leftist people who kind of consider that. Or kind of underestimate Russian imperialistic forces. And I think at least what I follow from these discussions, a lot of talks are done about, a lot of talks are going about Russian military strategies and tactics, how they are implied, how they were used in Syria, including targeting like explicitly and deliberately like civil infrastructure, for example, hospitals and humanitarian corridors where people were evacuating from the places. So that's probably the lesson which maybe at some point some people should know better, because it already like seeing what they've done in Syria already, it's it helps to understand what we can expect from their military actions. And also another thing is this whole machine of propaganda and disinformation, which Russia is using now in Ukraine. It was definitely also used in Syria and in other conflicts and wars where Russia was engaged, because we should not forget about the Georgian example, and all the other like Chechnya and all the other places where Russia used military force deliberately. So that's what it at least looks now from our Ukrainian perspective as important lessons, and why it is important for us. For me personally, and I also the issue of institutional and open racism of many European institutions is also very became very prominent and visible, and so on. And this argument, and I want to express my gratitude to Leon for saying it explicitly, that this argument is not about like reversing the picture, but to understanding how people can be treated if you do not if you put aside your institutional and open racism away. And also unfortunately, this argument is often used by some people who kind of hold this, let's say, campist perspective on the war in Ukraine, and saying that, so they are using it as an accusation against Ukrainians. So it's kind of these examples of differential treatment of refugees says more not about Ukrainians, but about like European institutions or EU institutions. So that's also, I think, is very striking and important, and it has to be reflected on many levels. And I cannot say that Ukrainian society is totally is that this kind of assumptions or prejudice, they do not exist in Ukrainian society. Of course, they also do, and I think that here a lot of things should be reflected and probably put into some kind of solidarity network as implication of the crises which are recurrent and in the context of migration inflows in EU, and including migration which is both economic migration and migration which has a military context involved, like in the case of Syria and Ukraine and many other countries. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Oksana, already for this really valuable input. Does someone from the speakers want to add on this? Like especially on the military, on Russia's military involvement in the WANA region? Maybe Leon would like to add something on this.
Yes, thank you, Oksana. Actually, I'm really going to echo what you just said on the topic. It really is something that is at core of our reflection based on the Syrian experience. When we see what is happening now in Ukraine, the very important lessons that we have are to listen and amplify the voices of those who are directly concerned, and fight all forms of imperialism. And as you said, many on the left, especially in Western context, but also in many other places, still refuse to see imperialism in any other form than the West. And it can take the form of the Russian imperialism, the Iranian regime forms of imperialism, Chinese imperialism, etc. And so when we wanted to draw on this topic, we wanted also to give a bit of context, maybe of Syria. Maybe a lot of you know, but in 2013, there was a very important moment in which there were chemical attacks, chemical weapons used. There were investigations in Syria, I mean, by the regime, and there were investigations that proved all of this. It was very well documented. And Barack Obama, who was the president of the United States at the time, had put previously a red line saying that if this line was crossed, then there would be potentially further action, but nothing happened. And what happened is that it's kind of like the the issue was left to Putin, basically, and to Russia. And the Russian intervention in support of the Assad regime was decisive in the fall of Aleppo, and gave little to no chance of military victory for the Syrian revolution. So, what we witnessed also as in the first weeks of the invasion of Ukraine was that there were many texts of support from Syrians to the Ukrainians, saying, we understand, we know. And there was a huge how to say, solidarity movement. Even people who were still in Idlib now formulating, who were part of the Syrian civil defense, formulating documents saying, okay, how do we act in context of bombings? How can we respond? How can we help? How can we, all of this organized on the ground, which was quite incredible. And according to us, among the first supports of the demands, the Ukrainian demands for a no-fly zone were Syrian comrades, because they knew, and there are archives from Kafran Bell in Syria, which state very clearly the demands for a no-fly zone in Syria in 2012 already, 2013. So these are strategic conclusions based on lived experiences, and that's why we want to state that very clearly, and to maybe echo what Oksana you were saying about these forms of imperialism that we need to understand from different points of view, not only from the Western imperialistic point of view. We understand, we try to understand a bit when we have people in Western countries or leftists who are telling us, yes, but you know, we're suspicious because our countries spend their time plunder and destroy other countries. So we are, you know, for us, this is the main way in which imperialism takes place. Well, yes, it does, but that doesn't exclude other forms of imperialism to take place. And the fact that they're doing that echoes really well also the situation in Syria, because many of the same people use the pretext that the Russian or the Syrian regimes embody symbolically kind of a struggle against Western and pro-NATO imperialism, and this Manichaean way of thinking is just purely abstract, and actually this position also pushes this left to relay the propaganda that you were mentioning, Oksana, of this regime, to the point of denying well-documented atrocities. And the speaking of coup d'état, when they describe the Maiden Uprisings or deny the war crimes of Russia in Syria, and denying the use of sarin gas in Syria by Assad's regime. So the results of this are just very catastrophic for internationalist coordination and solidarity and organization. But it's also a very irresponsible attitude, because first, it results in doing nothing. There's a total inertia from this perspective. It's also, as you were saying, Adriana, it echoes the idea of being on a geopolitical level that totally renders impossible any form of agency from the local actors, and just gives no possibility of action. But also, it favors discourses of the extreme right on all levels. Because in Syria, for example, inflamed with supremacist fantasies and dreams of a crusade against Islam, the far right already defended Putin and the Syrian regime for their alleged actions against jihadism and ISIS. And so without even understanding or even taking into account the responsibility that the Assad regime had in the rise of ISIS in Syria, for example. So first, all of this is very important to understand how we can learn from Syria in this context of Ukraine, because it is not only to think, there is a common enemy or a common pattern, but to understand really like how these patterns can impact our organizations and how we should prevent that in order to better our links, our networks, and especially our impact collectively.
Thank you, Leon, a lot for this. And I would like to maybe like keep this discussion a little bit on and like move on to the last questions, because we did pointed out already some connection points, and as Oksana also said, that like Ukrainian society, but also any society, is not perfect, but especially in a situation like this, this is a huge chance to actually come out with something more, to come out with more solidarity movements. And maybe I would like to ask Rabia for now to give a little input on like how solidarity from below can be a meaningful practice, and maybe you can focus a little bit on your work with migrants as you're working with migrants from Tunisia and in exile. So maybe you can reflect a little bit on this, and we can learn a little bit like what can this tell us to reflect on the situation in Ukraine and what's to become.
Thank you, Henriette. Just a little point, we are not only working with Tunisian migrants from Tunisia, we are working with migrants from all over the world, even with the Ukrainian, Syrian, every nationality. And here in FTSR, our work is on 3 levels. First level is French class, like La Cantine Syrienne. So we have a French class for alpha people who don't speak at all any kind of language. So we try to help them in order to speak French. We can follow them until they get the A2 level, so they can be independent and autonomous in their life. The second level is the administrative steps. Unfortunately, France administrative steps are very complicated. There is a lot of things to do. There is a lot of paper to prepare, etc., etc. So we try to facilitate these tasks. The third level is the numeric intervention, because everything for the French administration on the internet. And unfortunately, we receive people that they don't have the habit to use laptops, etc. So we try to help them on this level. We also have food help to people who are migrants or not migrants to not to be in need. The second thing that I want to speak about is that we help them also to find jobs, and this point is very, very important, because there is a lot of countries who are working with remittances. So, for example, if you see India, I think that the remittances part in the PIB of India is 3 times more than the stranger investments in India, which says a lot about the importance of remittances. For the Ukrainian case, the World Bank supposed that the remittances for Ukraine will be 8%, that will increase by 8%, which is very important for the Ukrainian. But we should also say that remittances will also decrease from Russia, because there is a lot of Ukrainians who are living in Russia who are participating on remittances. Well, so they cannot participate. So we help migrants to find jobs in order to be able to support this act of remittances, which is very important for country, well, for other countries, especially India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and country in wars. And I think that remittances are very important. And there is the case of Somali in civil wars. Then I think that Somali has no country, but the economic model was working only because of remittances. So the remittances are very important because I think that at sometimes are the only solution to give to support families in war, because when there is war, all the economic life stops, etc., etc. So remittances become the only source of income. So at FTCR, we are trying to be at the same time eminent solution for administrative problems, for juridic problems, for food problems, for homing problems, etc. But also we are trying to be a long-term solution in order to find jobs, in order to help people in their family. And in FTCR, we are all Tunisian and French, Malian and French, Vietnamese and French. So, or only French or only Tunisian. So, but we all have that double identity. So when we speak, when we make things, we always think that there is another country in the other shores that needs the input of their sons and daughters in France. So and in this idea we work, and on this our aim here in FTCR is to be able to help people here in France, and to be able also to help people in the other side of the shores. And it's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia, for giving us a little insight into your work, and I really like that you're also focusing on long-term solutions, as I can imagine that especially in war situations, it's often forgotten that there's also something else than immediate human aid which needs to be delivered, but also long-term solutions for such situations. Thanks a lot. Maybe I would hand over now to Serge, that maybe Serge can explain us a little bit more on this point of solidarities from below, on how agricultural supply can be organized from below, and not only from industrial agricultural organizations, but how to make it possible that a huge number of people can be supplied with food, and organizing this from below.
Yes, from below. Well, the thing is, we have this model, okay, that's been now, our model has been working for like 4 to 5 years, let's say, okay, and more people have been integrating the whole movement, specifically in Lebanon. Some of them are called neo-rurals, but most of them are already peasants that have been working for generations, and that have suddenly realized the importance of changing the practice in itself into something cleaner, in a way. So moving from the conventional chemical agriculture to cut costs, and which are economic and environmental costs, from one side, and the other side is we have finally realized that the bigger structure that usually is called the state, that is usually has it has the responsibility of taking care of the people. In our case, it was a complete hoax. So the second people started to see that like directly impacting everyday life, it was obvious that the only solution was solidarity and cooperation and working together. So this is how, in a way, it began. the model is really, it's not new. It's been done probably all over the world for as many centuries as we can think. The only difference is that now it is out of emergency that we have to reinvent it in a way, in order to at the same time be able to circulate around whatever policy is left from the state, and that is still a policy that is always for the bigger landowners, for the bigger corporations, for all the whales that usually take everything. And in Lebanon, the feudalism is still very much imprinted in the land. So land ownership is within the hands of the few, and land access is very complicated. So this was the first thing that had in a very organic way that started to organize almost on its own, especially after 17th of October, after the revolution in Lebanon. People started to call us and say, listen, we have a piece of land here, we can make it available, just do something, just take care of it. And then other people who organized in small groups, who were ready to put the time and the effort to actually take care of this land. And this is how it begins from the bottom. Now, on a larger scale, on a more internationalist scale, there's already beautiful experiences that are already happening. We have friends from Longomai, probably know about the cooperative. There is a farm or two, if I'm not mistaken, in Ukraine as well, all over Europe, and it's a beautiful example of how it can. Oh yes, I have to speak. I have to lower my voice because people are sleeping here. So the whole idea is to actually be working in a decentralized, connected way, like the rhizome, in a way you have smaller nucleuses that are connected in many different ways, but they are also able to be functioning on their own in most of, like, let's say 70 or 80% of sustainability and independence. So now, how can it be applied in times of war? Again, the experience of Syria is probably the most intense and impactful in that case. If we need to learn something, we can learn it from the blockade on the Yarmouk camp in Damascus. This is how a link between people from the inside and people from the outside were able to bring in seeds, who were able to plant again and then spread the knowledge, while other people were working on making videos to teach how to do it. And basically, this is how it can be done in I'm going to say, between brackets, a simple way, which is spreading the knowledge and the seeds. And just after that, just any access to land is how it goes. And now, if we're going to take what we have at this moment, there is many networks of traveling seeds, as we call them, that spreads all over the Mediterranean, from Tunisia to Palestine to France to Spain. It goes all the way around. And again, it is something that was beginning almost independently, with people not knowing that each other exists at first, and then we heard about each other. And that made the whole change, that suddenly we were all conscious that it was already happening at the same time, which makes even more sense. And then this network in itself can spread or link with other networks all over the place. And this is where, Oksana, I have so many questions to ask you. Maybe we will talk later, because now is probably not the time, but everything can be done in this model, in this way, what we've been doing through, and with the help of the Cantine Syrienne, the whole linkage with South America and India, and the whole probably, okay, I'm gonna simplify it and say like one of the big solutions is actually going completely horizontal, like as much link as possible, as much spreading knowledge as possible, and then the practice in itself will be adapted, just like just like the seeds again. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question completely.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Serge. No, you totally answered it. Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing like all this input and explanation about this amazing solidarity networks. And you're totally right. Like to have more horizontal knowledge sharing. That should be, of course, one way. I have one question. To Oksana, as we did talk tonight already so much on solidarity networks, and you also explained a lot about solidarity movements which were forming in Ukraine right now. I was wondering on, especially when it comes to say international solidarity networks, is there, I mean, Russia is not excluded from this. Is there any solidarity networks you know about that they're connecting with people from Ukraine, or is it totally impossible because people don't want or because they're limited to do so? Can you explain us a little bit about that?
Yes, you mean the networks between Russian and Ukrainian activists?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure, it exists. Mostly exists in leftist cycle because, like, all in all, the relation between progressive Ukrainian left and progressive Russian left, it has quite of a history for some years already. And now in Russia there is this, first of all, there is some progressive anti-war left groups, and there are, which are also interrelated. There are this feminist anti-war movement. And I would say in general that, I mean, the link exists. And for example, recently, some weeks ago, there was a common statement by Ukrainian organization Socialny Ruch, Social Movement, the name of the organization, and the Russian left group. Sorry, I just forgot the name. It's Russian Socialist Movement, I think, if I translated correctly. So there was a common anti-war statement by them, like that. Ukrainian left, they have established link with Russian anti-war movement. The problem is this Russian anti-war movement is very weak, of course, extremely weak, and it is further weakened by the reaction of Russian government on that, with all these changes in legislation, basically making the anti-war position like outlaw. So people are prosecuted for that with real terms, and yeah, so it's not about fines anymore, it's about terms in prison. So in general, it was quite weak at the very beginning, and now it's further weakened by the action of Russian government, and many people, they are fleeing Russia because of their position. Like also what I personally know and what I personally encounter, it's that these moments of people or activists who left Russia, they're also actively engaged in supporting like Ukrainian refugees in Europe, in European countries, like in Germany. That's what I know for sure, but I think also in other countries. So this link, it exists, but yeah, but the main problem is that unfortunately this Russian movement is very weak at the moment. But I'm not the person who, because there is also a big tendency in Ukraine now to reject any connections with people from Russia, even if they have kind of anti-war position. I don't see much sense in it, but I also kind of can relatively understand this position. But personally, I mean, I have connections with Russian anti-war activists. Yeah, that's it. Maybe I can also add on what Serge was saying a bit from Ukrainian perspective, because like self-sustainability in terms of planting their own food is actually not something uncommon in Ukraine, because Ukraine is also kind of poor country, and many people, they practiced like planting their own food, or at least a big part of their own food, and it was very popular in 90s when we had the economic collapse, and basically, I mean, many people, they got their food from their gardens on their plots of land. And it's still like quite popular. I mean, my mother, for example, has a small plot of land where she grows her own, well, this part of her own food, though she is living in a town, not even in a village. And also many people are still, like a lot of people are still living in rural areas where they kind of do this traditional natural agriculture, like producing food for themselves. And I think in terms of, in the light of the war, how this tendency will develop, because the safest part of Ukraine now is Western Ukraine. And it is also the most rural part of the country. It has been always like traditionally the most rural part of the country, like I think roughly 50% of population there lived in villages before the war. Now this part of Ukraine is where most people flee to, like this internally displaced people from Western and from Eastern and Central Ukraine and Southern Ukraine. They mostly end up in Western Ukraine because it is the safest part of the country. And big cities are also already overwhelmed with people, like having no, like for example, Lviv, which is the biggest city in Western Ukraine, is now overcrowded with refugees, and people are trying also to find some alternatives, like going to smaller towns and often going in villages, because many villages during the last years, they were like even disappearing. Like some villages, they were just simply disappearing because of the demographic changes, people fleeing to bigger cities, and so only mostly older people were left behind in the villages, and so they kind of died of age and so on. So some villages were even disappeared or depopulated to a great extent. And it would be interesting and probably very important in terms of society to envision it, but we may see the rebirth of Ukrainian village, like because in village you can still kind of find very cheap houses or even free houses, which are, some of them are abandoned, halfly abandoned, but for people who lost their home due to bombing, this still are options, and we may see kind of very big demographic and respectively like social change in Ukrainian rural territories. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Thanks, Oksana, for this input and answering the question. I would now maybe also like ask Leon, like what is your perspective or like your idea of how solidarity from below could be organized, especially like focusing on internationalism from below and like organizing around revolution in exile? Maybe you could talk a little bit about it, Leon.
Yes, totally. Yes, I'm definitely going to echo again what was said by our three comrades, Serge, Abi, and Oksana. But maybe one of the first thing that comes to mind when we think of how can it be a meaningful practice of international solidarities to let no one on our side isolated, let no one alone, in the sense that to make visible our support in a very explicit and clear manner. In the example of Syria, the fact that there was no strong discourse abroad supporting the revolution, supporting the initiatives of local organizations which organized all over the country life outside of the influence of the regime, fully autonomous parts. It contributed in giving power to the Assad discourse abroad of this whole context being, under his term, a Western conspiracy or a war against terrorism. So first of all, let no one alone. And obviously then the next step is to support popular resistance wherever it takes place. And for example, in Ukraine and Russia, support initiatives that come from the base that Oksana was mentioning earlier, the self-defense and self-organization initiatives that are currently flourishing and that echo what Serge was saying, what happened in Syria. But that to support and to visibilize and to make clear to let no one alone implies that we need to elaborate the means beforehand to create bonds and to have networks and links beforehand in order to have a better idea of the political organizations in a given territory and answer fast and have a quick and important solidarity response. And that's where we think, that's where we chose to coin the term internationalism from below. It's the idea of, and that echoes a lot the rhizome and the decentralized but linked networks that you were mentioning, Serge, but the idea of creating a lasting network and lasting ties of multilateral aid. If solidarity means a punctual response of a crisis, it's absolutely necessary, but it cannot be envisioned outside of a context of wider construction of political bonds, because otherwise we don't know. A very concrete example, that's what happened to us. We knew very quickly that we wanted to be active in supporting people responding to the situation in Ukraine, but simply we had no ties with any organization in Ukraine. But we were very closely tied with CrimethInc, which then had a lot of links in Ukraine, had a lot of contacts, had a lot of possibility to indicate. And then a network going to another network gave a possibility for us to be active. CrimethInc, I may precise, is international media network that publish articles, but also many resources and that is very quickly translated in a lot of languages so that it's reachable from many different places. And then we knew very quickly who to speak to, where to send the money, etc. And to act fast, because we know very quickly in times of conflict, in times of political crisis, the time is a very, very important issue. And that's what we mean when we talk about constructing a continuous internationalism, is that it's not only an internationalism that is constructed in moments of, very vivid uprisings that are very present in the media, for example, that we have a lot of echo from. It's an ongoing process, especially when there is no when there is nothing happening, when there's never nothing happening, but especially when it's not in the headlines, we shall construct a continuous internationalism. The example of Longomai is very clear on this aspect. It's well, as Serge mentioned, a self-organized agricultural cooperation and with very strong international ties everywhere, and that they have indeed, I think, 2 farms in Ukraine, and they are now doing a material support action that is very important and that works. And that's why we think that it's important to have this festival that we organize once a year, that is kind of an embodiment of what I'm trying to describe now. It's called Les Peuples Veulent, the people want, and it echoes the very famous slogan in the Arab Springs, the people want the fall of the regime. Well, now it's the peoples in the plural, because we're many peoples who want many different things, but for that we need to get in links, we need to get in networks, we need to hear and understand and know each other and know people that know themselves, each other, etc. And yeah, to continue on this ongoing process. The last thing, to come back to Syria, and that's why we think on this term, is that in Syria, with such a conception, with such a basis, might have contributed to a possible victory or to a different destiny of the Syrian revolution. So it's not only this internationalism from below. It's not only a question of a very interesting political ideal. No, it is a question of revolutionary strategy. Very concretely, it is a need, a very deep need to create links and alliances between self-organized forces working for, well, the emancipation of all in all contexts and in all places. And well, thank you again for organizing all of this, because it's giving a lot of echo and of material to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon, and I think your enthusiasm and solidarity is infectious. So thank you for taking us on this note. It's really nice to see your excitement, and we hope that we can build more of these connections, including through connecting all four of you, basically. So I hope that leads to more work between you all. So let me take a few questions from our public, and I encourage everybody who's on Zoom and on Facebook to write their questions. We're following both channels on Facebook as well as on Zoom. So let us know what your thoughts are. If you want to engage in any of the discussion, let us know. We have 3 questions at the moment. I think I'll take the first one, which is more directed towards the WANA focused people on the panel, or in our discussion. We have a question from Gunther Orth. Will anybody speak on the non-existent solidarity with Ukraine from countries of the South, especially the Arab world? Is it really viewed as a quote-unquote white world problem? So we spoke a lot about solidarity, but is there also a lack of solidarity here, or a lack of existent interest, perhaps? I hope that, I think all the speakers actually answered very nicely to the existing solidarity. So this is one question. And relatedly, we have a question on Russia. So does Russia turn the dependence of other regions? So for example, the WANA region's dependence on wheat, and also Western Europe's dependence on energy that was mentioned. Does Russia turn that into political support in areas or arenas such as the UN? What is the political attitude of WANA countries to this war? Are they neutral, supportive, or condemning? So I turn these 2 questions to anybody who would like to pick them up. Yes, Rabia, please go ahead.
I want to answer the first one about the non-existence of solidarity from people from the South, especially from the Arab world. And I want to speak especially about Tunisia, because I know what happens there. I will take the sentence of Oksana when she said, underestimate the Russian imperialism ability. I think that, yes, in Tunisia, there is this kind of problem that underestimating the Russian imperialist ability, so they don't took the Russian invasion in the same level as Occidental invasion in America or Great Britain, etc. But that does not mean that people are not with Ukraine or solidary with Ukraine. Not at all. They are very, very, very compassionate with Ukrainian, and all what Serge said, Leon said, or what happened here in France or even in Tunisia have a lot of meaning. And then let's say that also the Russian propaganda make things looks like people from the south are not with Ukrainian, which is totally false. It's only a Russian propaganda who wants to promote this idea, which is totally false. And then I understand people who thinks like that, because when you see, for example, the official reaction of the Syrian regime, will think that all people from the Middle East are, or from MENA region, are not solidary with Ukraine. Or then when Putin use the argument of using Middle East fighters, that also add some patterns who explain why people will think that people from the other shore are not solidary with what happened in Ukraine, but it's totally false. There is a lot of things that makes the image look like people are not with Ukrainian. There is a part maybe of truth, but it's not. They are not solidary, but they don't have the same interest because they are far, because they have already too much problem. But in a general way, I think that in Tunisia, at least, and I think in all the Arab world, people knows what means to be in war, what means to have this kind of problem. This is why that they are very, very compassionate with Ukrainian, and in Tunisia especially because we know what happened in Libya next to us, and every Tunisian has a family member from Libya, and we know exactly what happening in wars, and this is why it's impossible for any human being to be solidary with Ukrainians. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. Would anyone like to add anything? Serge, go ahead.
Yes, just to add on the it was the second part of the second question, because the first question I think Rabia answered for all of us. Like, I mean, we all know war, so basically, and we don't have to go back on that. But on the other side, which is the Russian regime using the dependency of many of the global South countries in order to push their agenda, it's almost flagrant. Like, I mean, at some point, if I'm going to take the example of Lebanon, which is a torn country ideologically, because there's like so many things happening at the same time, so you can't get one opinion, but at the same time, there will always be the regime in itself, which is an agglomerate of mafias. They all have masalih. Okay, I can't think of the word now. Like, they all have
Interest.
Their own
interest, exactly. And most of these interests, in a way or another, are connected to the Russian regime. So maybe this answers a little bit on the silence of the government for whatever this word has any worth anymore. But it's mostly because there is this, okay, I forgot the word again. Oh no, interest. Okay, I'm blocking on that word. Anyway, the whole idea in this case is that people are, in a way or another, benefiting from this war, and just maybe this is what the regimes that are still in place and controlling our countries, they're getting something out of it. So maybe this is why media-wise, officially-wise, like the main voices are not being up against it. And then we have also the problem. I'm not sure about the rest of WANA region, but in Lebanon we have the campus problem. It's very deeply rooted. Like our left, the main left, or what is left of the left, is deeply in this this problematic as well of okay, we are against Western American imperialism, and so we are unable to see that there is also other kinds of imperialism, and this made a lot of problems when it was time for us to be completely in solidarity with our Syrian brothers and sisters. A lot of our left was against it, and we had to clash with many usually good people who are who have good intentions, because there is this vision, because at some point they are still unable to extract themselves from the only ultimate fight, which is the American imperialism. Whereas now we are living in a world where there are many imperialisms, and this is what we need to learn. It's more of a top-down thing. We're being attacked from the top of the pyramid, and maybe this is the main challenge of the traditional left in most countries now, which is to let go of this very weird rapport with the whole 20th century bipolarity fight thing. And this is probably why we're not seeing that much, at least wording of solidarity, unless it is from the very radical, very at least radical or not traditional left of the anarchist and autonomist movements, which are more in tune with the fact that people everywhere get hurt when there is war. And so this is probably the thing we need to differentiate between what a regime and a mainstream media is saying and what the small things that are connecting are trying to actually do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Serge, for that intervention. Oksana, your hand is up. Leon, did you want to say something before? No. Okay, Oksana, please go ahead.
I just also want to comment on it briefly. Yeah, I totally agree with some other participants, but I also, yeah, like Rabi was saying, like a problem does exist, and of course there is solidarity expressed by some initiatives and groups. But the problem does exist, not like it's not an insult of something, but the roots of this problem of imbalance solidarity, lack of solidarity is very obvious, because I mean, I can also hardly say that there was a lot of solidarity from Ukrainian side when the war in Syria started, and it's and it's not because like people don't have compassion or something. It's often not the case. The case is often that solidarity, as the one was mentioning, it demands to have a pre-connection and networks. And the networks of solidarity are often concentrated or constructed in a way, first of all, regionally, because of geographical separation and or geographical unity or some common problems. And that's how, like, I mean, I know how academic life is functioning in that way, that we have some regional conventions, regional conferences, and so on. And the same as with political activism and activism in general. And another thing is, of course, resources, because to construct this network of solidarity, people need resources, and you cannot demand or expect these resources to be in vulnerable countries. And I mean also Ukraine here, like a country with a lack of economic capacities and resources, which is totally into its own problems, which are numerous, and so on and so forth. So we can see that this solidarity is, and here I'm speaking mostly about left solidarity, it's constructed in a way also along the lines of core and periphery. So we have the concentration of these networks of solidarity in core countries, and they're kind of building their connection to other countries. But there is also, and I think the problem has to be also think about that, a lack of this horizontal kind of solidarity between countries which are more in the same, more or less in the same economic and political or social situation, but being in different regions, though their circumstances can be quite similar, or at least very comparable in some aspects. And I think that's also a good lessons for leftists in Ukraine, probably, that too little attention was paid to problems and crises and conflicts and wars in other regions. So I'm not saying this there was no attention at all, but of course, like, to build solidarity, it's not about writing one article about or two articles about like this conflict, analyzing the situation, or taking one interview. Building solidarity in this pre-existing network, which Leon again was mentioning, it requires like far more capacities, resources, and also intentions to do that. And it's also probably a very good lesson for Ukrainian left and for me personally.
Thank you so much, Oksana. Leon, go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's a very quick anecdote to respond to Oksana. You were saying it's a good lesson for Ukrainians drawing from the experience of the conflict. But recently, I saw footage from early on in the Syrian revolution turned into conflict, where, if I'm not mistaken, it was an independent documentary. And I forgot the name of the director, but I could definitely share it with you later. And if I'm not mistaken, it was two participants in the Syrian Free Army, and they were discussing the situation, and you know, they were saying, but it's incredible that nobody says anything. It's happening there to us, and nobody's saying anything. And the other one responds, but you know, last year, I mean, it's been years. There is a conflict in Yemen. We didn't do anything. We didn't organize. We didn't reach out, and it just echoed to me, you know, like this idea that it's within the context of the impossible that these things emerge as necessities. But what we can draw from these experiences now is that the work needs to be continuous, as you were also saying, and for that in the next, I mean, in all the contexts that are ours now, to always bear that in mind. But to say, to echo to you, in Syria, that people were thinking the same too.
Thank you, Leon, for that intervention too, and for that comment. We do have a couple more questions actually from our team that's behind the scenes. So with your permission, I will read them out, unless both Ansar and Orlena want to speak themselves. No? Okay, so I'll just read them out. So question for Oksana. Oksana, you spoke about the offshore agro profits in Ukraine. Could you comment on Zelensky's neoliberal land reform and its significance for the Ukrainian economy, the food and trade crisis, and potential food sovereignty, as well as what you termed the rebirth of the Ukrainian village, and the impact on women's work and social reproduction in the end, on the land. So that's a question for Oksana. And then also another question is, I would also like to understand whether Oksana could tell us what the war did to leftist formations in Ukraine. Is there any new development, new alliances, old fights forgotten? We are mainly talking about the anarchists, so this is why we're curious about other aspects.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. With the land reform, it was a long-lasting struggle between IMF and other financial institutions and Ukrainian government, and it was finally done, yes, by Zelensky's government. Basically, we haven't even had a chance to track the outcomes of this reform, but of course we were trying to analyze and predict them and criticize them. I mean, by we, I'm saying the Commons journal Spilne, which I'm part of. Yeah, of course, we were very critical about it from the very beginning. And but we cannot say what are the implications of that reform now, because yeah, it basically was the course of the creation of this market, or its intensification was distorted by the war. But as far as I know, they are kind of, at least what was in news, they are putting it in news that they are selling land now also during the war, which is very interesting, because there was at some point a moratorium when the war started. There was a moratorium on selling a real estate property. Then they kind of lifted it, but they never put a moratorium, even temporal, on selling the land during the war. But it will probably have a very a lot of implications for Ukrainian society in general. Whether it will have how to perceive it in the context of possible rebirth of the village, I'm not saying it will happen, but it depends very much on the development of the war itself and of the territorial loss in the end, which Ukraine would have or will not have, we will see. But in the context of this tendency of potential, I can say that a big amount of land was still not like sold, so it's still in personal hand of people mostly, or as it was the usual case during the land as a moratorium to sell land. The usual case was that people kind of owned that land, but they rented it to bigger farms or to bigger agro holdings on a very cheap price, and so like the land was partially concentrated through renting in this big agri holding. So I don't see that some big sale of land have already happened, and whether the war will influence the course of this or the possibility of this big sale of land by ordinary people, it's still under the question. Maybe like this concentration of demographic changes in villages will somehow influence it. But it's all like kind of speculation, because in situation like this, like now, it's really hard to predict the development of such things, because they depend on very many factors which are unpredictable at this point. As for leftist formation, I mean, I would say that yes, anarchists, it's true, anarchists were the most prepared to face the situation like this, because they organized and everything. So this Operation Solidarity, which I mentioned before, and the different units of anarchists which were created, I mean military units of anarchists which were created very fast. So this Operation Solidarity is also initially created by anarchists, anarchist groups. Later, it was also supported by some other groups. There was also a group of very provisionally called pro-Russian leftists. I haven't heard much of them recently. Because I mean, it's a very probably painful topic for us to discuss now, because we had all these clashes since 2014. So it's not new, because the war actually started in 2014, and the split in Ukrainian left happened back then. And now it's like that the split became more probably impossible to overcome, I would say, at least for me personally at this stage. It may change, of course. But also some people whose position I was criticizing criticizing or whose position I was skeptical before the war, they kind of changed their mind very quickly after after Russia invaded Ukraine. But some people still keep silence, and I have no idea what happens in their head, or whether they have draw some conclusions after the events, because I draw many personally for my political perspective.
Thank you, Oksana, for maybe having this last words. If someone of the speakers wants to quickly add something, or wants to hand in the last word. Okay, because then I would say our last words sort of. We started to talk today and discuss tonight many topics, though this can be just a starting point, and to discuss especially activist network and solidarity from below. And I hope that this discussion which we had tonight will go further, and that you could also contribute to connect you guys a little bit, and be sure that this networks can also largen a little bit. Many thanks to our speakers, of course, to Oksana, to Rabia, to Serge, and to Leon. And thanks a lot that you took today the time to join us and to discuss with us. I also want to thank the technical support with Georg from Orient, and the help with the chats to Ansa and Alena. And of course, thanks to the Bildungswerk Heinrich Böll Foundation to be supported and make this event possible tonight. And of course, thanks a lot for our visitors today and your interest. We hope we could add some new informations and ideas, and looking forward to see you in similar places soon. You can follow Disorient on Instagram or Facebook for more events of this kind, and also you can follow Left East on Facebook and Twitter for additional critical perspectives, especially nowadays. Thanks a lot.